In July of 2002, in a remote patch of desert in the United Arab Emirates, a weather station recorded a temperature of 52.1 degrees Celsius, about 126 degrees Fahrenheit. It was the hottest temperature ever measured in the entire history of the country, and for more than 20 years, that record simply stood, untouched, unthreatened. A line that seemed to mark the absolute ceiling of what even this brutally hot corner of the planet could ever produce. This year, that line came within half a degree of falling. Half a single degree. After the UAE recorded its hottest May in its entire recorded history, the country ended up closer to breaking its all-time heat record than it has been in more than 2 decades. And here is the part that should make you sit up and pay attention. The one force most likely to finally shove it over that edge is not even here yet. Far out across the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles away, a vast climate event is gathering its strength, one that forecasters are now warning could become the single most powerful of its kind in 155 years. This is the story of just how close the UAE now stands to its hottest day in recorded history, and of the enormous planet-scale force that is quietly loading the dice against that old record. Let me be precise and honest right at the very start, because it genuinely matters. The UAE's all-time heat record, that 52.1 degrees set back in 2002, still stands. It has not yet been broken. So this is not a video telling you that the country just hit its hottest temperature ever, because it hasn't. What this is, instead, is the story of how the records are falling all around that one great mark. The hottest months, the warmest seasons, the near misses, and of how the all-time record itself is now under more pressure than it has faced in an entire generation. And of why, thanks to what is happening right now out in the Pacific, that pressure is about to grow considerably. So let me lay out what is actually happening, because every one of these records is real. This year, in 2026, the UAE recorded its hottest May in its entire history, with temperatures reaching 51.6 degrees Celsius. That single reading placed the season within just half a degree of the all-time national record. The narrowest margin since that record was first set all the way back in 2002. And this is very much not happening in isolation. Globally, the month of June in 2026 was the second hottest June ever recorded anywhere on the planet. The first half of this year was the third warmest start to any year in the entire history of measurement, trailing only the 2 years immediately before it. And those 2 years just ahead of it tell you almost everything you need to know about the direction all of this is heading. The year 2024 was the hottest year ever recorded on the planet, clocking in at roughly 55 degrees Celsius above the temperatures of the pre-industrial era, the first time the world had ever crossed that mark for a full calendar year. The year 2023 sits close behind it as the second hottest, and now 2026 is running third, with a monster still building. In other words, the 3 hottest years in the entire history of human record-keeping are the 3 most recent ones. This is not a spike or a fluke or a bad summer. It is a staircase, and the world has been climbing it, step by relentless step. The UAE's heat records are simply one country's view of that same staircase, and right now, that country is standing very near the top of the step it's on. And remember where the UAE actually sits. It is in what is, by the cold hard numbers, the hottest region on the entire face of the Earth. Of the 20 highest national temperature records ever verified anywhere in the world, 9 of them belong to the Middle East, and every single one of those 9 is above 50 degrees Celsius. And in just the past few years, one country after another across this broader region has set brand new national heat records. China, Morocco, Turkey. The records are tumbling, one after another, and the UAE's own all-time mark from 2002 is beginning to look less and less like a permanent ceiling, and more like a line simply waiting its turn to be crossed. And now comes the accelerant. Because as scorching as this year has already been, the single most powerful natural force that drives the planet's temperatures to record highs has, until just recently, been largely switched off, and it is now, at last, switching back on. It is called El Niño. If you follow the weather even a little, you have almost certainly heard the name before. usually dropped into conversation alongside a strangely hot year or an odd, mild winter. But most people have genuinely no idea what El Niño actually is, or why on earth it should hold such enormous power over the temperature of the entire globe. So let me explain it properly, because it is one of the most important rhythms in all of the planet's climate, and it is central to this story. El Niño is one phase of a great, natural, back-and-forth cycle that plays out across the tropical Pacific Ocean, which is the single largest body of water anywhere on Earth. Here is how it works. Under normal conditions, steady winds known as the trade winds blow across the tropical Pacific from east to west, and as they blow, they physically drag the warm, sun-heated surface water of the ocean along with them, piling it up into an enormous pool of warm water on the western side of the Pacific, over near Indonesia and Australia. Meanwhile, on the eastern side, down near the coast of South America, the surface water that gets pushed away is replaced by cold water welling up from the deep ocean below. That is simply the ordinary, everyday state of the Pacific. But every few years, for reasons rooted in the vast machinery of ocean and atmosphere, those trade winds weaken. And when they slacken, that colossal pool of warm water that had been held way over in the west comes sloshing back toward the east, spreading a giant blanket of unusually warm surface water clear across the tropical Pacific. That, right there, is an El Niño. And here is precisely why it matters so profoundly, not just for the Pacific, but for the whole world. That vast expanse of warm water releases a truly staggering amount of heat that had been stored down in the depths of the ocean, straight up into the atmosphere, and because the Pacific is so unimaginably immense. Sprawling across roughly a third of the entire surface of the planet, releasing all of that extra heat into the sky is genuinely enough to nudge the average temperature of the whole globe upward for a year or two at a stretch. It is important to understand that El Niño does not create heat out of nowhere. What it does is take heat that the ocean had been quietly banking away and release it into the air all at once. It is, in effect, the planet exhaling a long-held breath of stored warmth. And that exhaled heat does far more than simply raise the global thermometer. It reaches out and rearranges weather all around the world, which is part of why forecasters watch El Niño so obsessively. As that warm water shifts eastward, it drags the planet's great engines of rainfall along with it, and the results ripple across continents. El Niño tends to bring drought and wildfire to Australia and Southeast Asia, torrential rain and flooding to parts of South America and the southern United States, and disruptions to the monsoons that billions of people depend on for their crops. It even reaches into the Atlantic, where it tends to suppress the formation of hurricanes. A single shift in the temperature of one patch of the Pacific, in other words, can redraw the weather map of the entire globe for a year or more. The economic toll of a strong El Niño can run into the trillions of dollars, spread across failed harvests, floods, droughts, and disasters worldwide. It is arguably the single most powerful year-to-year climate lever on the planet, and it is one that human beings do not control at all. And the El Niño that is developing right now, in the second half of 2026, is shaping up to be an absolute monster. NOAA, the United States Climate Agency, officially declared that an El Niño had formed earlier this year, and every forecast since has done nothing but climb higher. Climate models run by 3 different continents, American, European, and Australian, are all now pointing toward the very same startling conclusion. This could become a record-strong event, quite possibly the most powerful El Niño in the entire 155-year record, stretching all the way back to the 1870s. By one key measure, the model suggests this El Niño could warm that critical patch of the Pacific to nearly a full degree hotter than the previous record holder, the Great El Niño of 2015 and 2016. Forecasters have placed it squarely in what they call the Super El Niño category. And this next part is crucial. An El Niño does its very biggest work in the months after it first forms. It typically reaches its peak in the depths of the northern winter, from November into January, and its warming influence then lingers well into the following year, which means that the full unleashed force of this particular one is still ahead of us. Scientists are already projecting that next year, 2027, stands a strong chance of becoming the hottest year in the entire history of the planet, in large part because of it. And we know what these super El Niños are capable of, because we have lived through them before. The last two truly great ones each left an unmistakable mark on the global record. The El Niño of 1997 and 1998 was, at the time, the most powerful ever measured, and it helped make 1998 a landmark hot year that stood out for a decade, while unleashing catastrophic floods, droughts, and wildfires across the globe that, by one estimate, cost the world economy trillions of dollars in the years that followed. Then came the El Niño of 2015 and 2016, which shattered that record and helped push 2016 to become in its turn the hottest year ever recorded up to that point. Each of these events did the same essential thing. It took the steady, underlying warming of the planet and gave it a sudden, powerful shove, vaulting the world to a new temperature record that then became the new floor. And the models are now warning that the one gathering in the Pacific today could be stronger than either of them, stronger, potentially, than anything in 155 years. If the past is any guide, the year that follows a shove like that tends to be one for the record books. So now, put the two pieces together, side by side. On the one hand, you have the UAE already sitting within a mere half a degree of its all-time heat record, at the tail end of a year that has been smashing monthly records, in a region where national records are toppling like dominoes. And on the other hand, you have a potentially record-shattering El Niño now switching on, poised to add its own great boost of heat to a planet that is already, right now, running hotter than at any other point in all of recorded history. It is a little like walking toward a finish line that was already close, and then, at that very moment, having the ground beneath your feet begin to slide in the same direction. Now, no one can tell you the precise day, or even the precise year, that the UAE's 2002 record will finally fall. But the forces now lining up against it are unmistakably stronger than they have ever been before. That old mark from 2002, which stood untouched and serene for 2 full decades, is starting to look a great deal less like a permanent wall and a great deal more like a countdown. It is worth understanding, though, why breaking a record like this is genuinely difficult, even in a year running as hot as this one, because it explains how the way can be shattering monthly records and still leave that one great mark standing. A national all-time temperature record is an extraordinarily specific thing. It doesn't just require a hot summer, it requires a near-perfect alignment of conditions in one exact spot on one exact afternoon. You need the reading to happen at one of the very hottest locations in the entire country, a place like Swayhan or the deep interior of the Al Dhafra Desert, far from the cooling influence of the coast. You need cloudless skies letting the full force of the sun hammer the ground. You need the winds to fall almost completely still so that no cooler air is stirred in. And you need all of it to converge at the single hottest hour of the single hottest day. Miss any one of those ingredients, and the temperature falls a degree or two short, even in a brutal year. That is precisely why an all-time record can survive for decades while the world warms around it, and precisely why, when the background heat finally climbs high enough that the record falls even on a merely ordinary scorching day, it is such a genuine milestone. Now let me be genuinely honest and careful here, because this is exactly the kind of story that so often gets wildly exaggerated. And it deserves far better than that. El Niño is powerful, yes, but it is not a magic wand, and it guarantees absolutely nothing. It loads the dice toward heat. It does not promise a specific record on a specific afternoon in a specific country. A given summer in the way could still, purely by the luck of local weather patterns, come and go without ever breaking that all-time mark. El Niño or no El Niño. And here is the single most important point in this entire video. El Niño is not actually the real story. It is a temporary, natural, cyclical event, and the planet will inevitably swing back the other way into its cooler opposite phase within a year or two, exactly as it always has done. The true reason that each of these hot years keeps climbing higher than the last, the reason the whole baseline itself keeps relentlessly rising, is not El Niño at all. It is the long-term warming of the planet, driven by human beings burning fossil fuels. Even in years with no El Nino whatsoever, recent years have still ranked among the very hottest ever measured. Think of it this way, because the picture is genuinely clarifying. The underlying human-caused warming is like a rising tide, slowly, quietly, and relentlessly lifting the entire ocean of global temperature, year after year after year. El Nino, by contrast, is just a single large wave, riding along on top of that steadily rising tide. It is the wave that grabs all the headlines whenever it briefly lifts us up to a shocking new record. But it is the deep tide underneath that actually determines where the water level truly sits, decade after decade. And when this El Nino eventually fades away, as it certainly will, the UAE's heat is not going to vanish along with it. The wave will roll back. But the tide will still be rising, right where it was. And that steadily rising tide is exactly what makes all of this so much more than a mere game of chasing impressive-sounding record numbers. For a country like the UAE, a place that already sits perilously close to the practical limits of human heat tolerance, every single fraction of a degree that the baseline climbs carries real and heavy weight. It means more days, every year, when simple outdoor work becomes genuinely dangerous, which is the very reason the country already enforces a mandatory midday work ban straight through the peak summer months, halting labor during the most lethal hours of the afternoon. It means more and more strain on the electrical grid, as the air conditioning that keeps the entire society alive and functioning is forced to run harder and longer and closer to its limits. And it means more of those brutal, suffocating, humid summer nights that never quite manage to cool down before the sun comes up again. The record number glowing on the thermometer is really just the headline. The far more important story sitting underneath it is that the ordinary summer, the quiet baseline against which every one of these dramatic records is actually measured, is itself slowly, steadily, and unmistakably getting hotter. And a place like the UAE feels that deep shift more sharply and sooner than very nearly anywhere else on Earth. It is worth pausing on who actually bears the weight of that shift, because it is not evenly shared. The people most exposed to a rising baseline are not the ones in cooled offices and cars, but the laborers who build and maintain these desert cities from the outside, the construction crews, the delivery riders, the groundskeepers, working through a heat that grows a little more punishing every year. It is for exactly these workers that the midday work ban exists, and every fraction of a degree the baseline rises widens the window of the day that is simply too dangerous for human beings to be outside. A record-hot afternoon is a headline that passes in a day. But a permanently hotter climate reshapes the daily rhythm of an entire society. When people can work, when children can play outside, how hard the power grid must strain to keep everyone alive through the night. That is the real stake here, and it is a great deal more consequential than any single number on any single thermometer. So this summer, as the heat settles down over the way it faithfully does every single year, that 24-year-old record from 2002 still stands, for now. It has survived yet another season, clinging on by a margin of half a degree, but far out across the Pacific, the great warm pool of water is sliding steadily eastward, the trade winds are slackening their grip, and the most powerful El Nino in more than a century and a half is quietly gathering its strength, preparing to exhale its enormous store of banked heat up into the sky, just as the calendar turns toward the very peak of its power this winter. And whether that old record finally falls this year, or next year, or the year after that, almost does not matter in the end. Because the deeper truth that the number is really pointing toward is already here, and it is not going anywhere, in one of the hottest places on the entire planet. A ceiling that once seemed utterly permanent has quietly become a moving target, and it is moving in one direction, and one direction only. The heat is breaking records that stood untouched for a generation, and the great forces that break those records are only